We continue to be challenged with testing for COVID-19, having enough supplies and dealing with backlogs of tests to be able to give people results in a quick turnaround. In this episode of Shareable Science Beyond the Blog, we'll dive in to a potential option called pooled testing. Welcome to Shareable Science. Science you can share. Pooled testing follows a straightforward idea. If you combine a piece of each sample into a pool, you may be able to get results with fewer numbers of tests. Here's a visual example of what that could look like. I've shown 10 individuals and each of them having their own swab sample. If you take a portion of that swab sample and you combine them, let's say in groups of 5, into a single tube, you now are only doing 2 tests instead of the original 10. You run this for the test for the virus, and if the pool is negative, you can clear everybody in that group. They're all negative. If the pool is positive, you go back and you deconstruct it. You break it down into individual tests for each person who was in that pool, and then you identify where your positive or your positives come from. So in this example, 5, 6, 7 tests compared to the original 10 if you had run everyone one at a time. So the goal of pooled testing, or the hope of pooled testing, is that you can run fewer tests using fewer reagents and saving on your labor time, but still get your results. Now, here's a different example. Let's look at 100 people, and let's assume that within the community that we're testing, there's a 5% prevalence rate. So you would expect on average that 5 out of every 100 people would test positive. So if you divide these 100 people into 20 pools of 5 people each, and you run each of those pools, that's 20 tests right off the bat. And let's just assume that in our worst case scenario, our average 5 positives are each in a different pool. So 5 of our 20 pools come back positive. So we can get rid of the 15 pools that tested negative. Everybody is cleared. And then the 5 pools that test positive, we break them down each into their own individual 5 people. So 5 pools with 5 people each broken down is 25 additional tests. So at the end of this, we would have run 45 tests instead of 100 tests if you were doing everybody all at once. That shows you the potential power of using pooled testing as a way to more rapidly work through a population. Now, pooling can be used for different testing scenarios. There are 3 key scenarios that we want to pay attention to. Diagnostic testing, where I actually suspect that the individuals I'm testing either have COVID-19 or have been exposed. They have symptoms or we have a known exposure. That's different from screening tests, where I am looking for individuals without any prior suspicion that they have been exposed. They may not have symptoms. I may be doing a screening test for back to school or for back to workplace. And then the third possibility is surveillance testing. In this instance, I'm actually monitoring an entire community. I am randomly selecting individuals for testing to determine what's the rate of infection in my community and is it trending up or down. I'm not giving results back to individuals in surveillance testing like I would be in screening or diagnostic. Pooling can be used for all 3 of these. Now, like every other video we've made, there are some caveats or some cautions that we need to pay attention to. There are 3 particular with pooling. The first is that pooling really only is beneficial when the prevalence is 10% or lower. If you have a higher prevalence in your community, then more of your pools are going to contain positive individuals, and you're going to be doing more work in following up on those pools than if you just tested everybody at once. So pooling works best when you're generally 10% or lower in the frequency of infection in your community. Here's another challenge. By its very nature, by combining bits of samples together, you're diluting any one sample. So an individual that is infectious, that has virus in their sample, in their nasal swab, by pooling, you're diluting the amount of virus that you are actually able to detect. Now, this is generally not an issue for most of our diagnostic tests, but it means it's really important to determine what the right sample size is. So, the CDC and the FDA have issued guidance recently on pooling, and they generally land that the size of the pool should be 5 or less. Now, that number may change as tests become more sensitive or as recommendations shift, but right now, pooling generally, at least in the United States, would involve 5 samples or less pooled into a single tube. Sample tracking also becomes more complicated because now I've got to keep track of which individual samples have I pooled into this tube or into this well in a plate that I am testing. That means you've got to watch out for the possibility of mislabeling samples or of potentially cross-contaminating samples as you are doing the process of pooling. So this is definitely an issue that you've got to pay attention to because the risk of an error goes up as the pooling becomes more complicated. Robotics can help reduce this and paying really close attention to your details. But these are some things that you've got to be concerned about when you think about pooling. That said, pooling potentially offers us one way to think about how we deal with the need to test multiple individuals rapidly and at repeated time intervals. So it's definitely something that you're going to want to keep an eye on as more and more groups begin to explore testing. If you'd like to dig deeper into the details around pooling, here are 3 websites that you might want to take a look at. Each of them discuss the pros and the cons and some practical applications of pooling. If you think this is useful, please share this with those around you. Thank you for joining us for this issue of Shareable Science Beyond the Blog. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care.